Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. What exactly are the Model United Nations and Global Classrooms programs operated by the United Nations Association of the USA, commonly called UNA USA? How can students in Frankfort, Kentucky, Chicago, Illinois, New York City, Miami, and in many cities in other nations around the world participate in these very interesting programs? My guest today will respond to these and several other issues. Dr. Lucia Rodriguez is the Vice President of Education at the United Nations Association of the USA. Her main goal is to bring the world and the United Nations to young people. Dr. Rodriguez has a PhD in education from Columbia University, and she did her undergraduate work in international affairs at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. My second guest is Elizabeth Scarinci, and Elizabeth plans to study international relations and journalism in college. During her sophomore year, she participated in 2 Model United Nations conferences. Lucia, Elizabeth, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks.
Appreciate you being with me. Lucia, let's start. We're going to get into Model UN, we're going to get into global classrooms, but let's start off with a little more basic information about UNA USA, the United Nations Association of the USA. What exactly is it? What are its main goals?
UNA USA, let me give you a little bit of background. It's the oldest, one of the oldest grassroots foreign policy organization in the country. Actually, I like to say that we were founded before the UN. We were founded by Eleanor Roosevelt. And she wanted to make sure that the UN did not go the way of the League of Nations. She wanted to make sure that the UN had the support of the American people. And so when the UN was founded, the support was there, mainly because of the efforts and the work of Eleanor Roosevelt. Since then, we have survived. We're still around. We're a viable organization. We have a really illustrious board with such people as John Whitehead, Elliot Richardson, and Tom Pickering, among others.
Mm-hmm. Very good. And you're right, your board of directors is outstanding. You mentioned John Whitehead, who was Deputy Secretary of State in the Reagan administration, Tom Pickering, who was the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations during the first Gulf War under President George Herbert Walker Bush, and of course Elliot Richardson, a friend of ours who passed away a few years ago. But you've got some outstanding people on the board, and you also have a tremendous network around the country. How many chapters and how many members do you have around the United States?
We have, as an association, about 175 chapters around the country, with probably 25,000 members who really are supportive of the UN and work in their local communities to get others on board. And also we have young people who are even starting their own within the UNA chapters, sort of, I would say, mini associations, who are really, are interested in the work of the UN, want others to know about it, want to get involved in the work of the UN. So it's a real growing organization.
Mm-hmm. It certainly is. And of course, our viewers can learn more about the United Nations Association by tapping into www.unausa.org. And there's a lot of information not only about the United Nations Association, but about the United Nations. But it's important to keep in mind, too, that UNA USA is not part of the United Nations.
Right.
You have an interest in helping people better understand the United Nations to help us really to understand these international issues. Is that correct?
And to support the work of the United Nations. We think that here in the United States especially, it's easy to forget what the UN does besides Security Council and peacekeeping. They do all kinds of humanitarian things that a lot of Americans, I think, are not aware because we don't see the packages falling from the sky delivering food to us. But it's important that we're aware of what the UN is doing, and we try to get involved in their work and try to help out as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. And that's very important because you do read about the highly visible parts of the UN peacekeeping, Security Council resolutions dealing with Darfur, but we don't hear about what the UN is doing to combat terrorism, what it's doing to help move aircraft safely in international airspace, ships on the high seas, mail to get to its destination overseas. So there's a silent part of the UN that affects us every day of our lives, benefits us, but we really learn very little about it. So the UNA USA is working in that area. Now, in the introduction, I mentioned that one of your goals is to bring the world and the United Nations to young people. One of the ways you do that is through the Model United Nations program called MUN. What is that program?
Model UN are simulations of UN organs where young people step into the shoes of UN ambassadors and role play those ambassadors as they debate various issues on the UN's agenda. As you mentioned earlier, those issues can range from the terrorism, child trafficking, poverty, education, etc. And it gives these young people an opportunity to really feel what it's like to really be these ambassadors, having to negotiate, to discuss sometimes quite complex issues and try to reach some kind of resolution or a common understanding.
Exactly, right. Now you brought a very interesting videotape with you, and we're going to watch a short clip from that that'll give us a little bit of an overview, more of an overview of what the Model UN program is about.
Thank you.
A new century, a new millennium, hopefully a new age of peace. The United Nations was born in response to the horrors of 2 global wars and countless international conflicts. Since the end of World War II, the United Nations has worked to foster dialogue among people of all nations. From the beginning, the United Nations has recognized that educating the next generation is vital to ensure lasting peace. Except for a brief hiatus during World War II, a form of the Model United Nations has been in continuous operation since the 1920s. Begun in 1923 as the Model League of Nations, the program was initially intended for university-level students. By the 1950s, the approach was recognized as an effective tool for high school students as well. Last year, over 200,000 people, from 6th graders to graduate students, participated in Model United Nations classes or clubs in over 32 countries worldwide. In high school and college classrooms and at conferences around the world, Model United Nations students are debating the same issues, learning the same tactics, and struggling for solutions together, just as in the real United Nations.
Lucia, that was a very interesting tape. I wish we had time to watch all of it. I really do, but we didn't. But it really gives us a good overview of the Model UN program. Hey, let me go to you. I mentioned in the introduction, you have participated in 2 Model United Nations programs. Yes. You're doing an intern program, a summer intern program with the UNA USA. How did you hear about the Model UN program? What got you interested in being a Model UNer?
Well, the summer after my freshman year, I thought I might be interested in international relations. So I went to Oxford that summer and studied international relations. And at the end of that course, there was a little mini Model UN. So it was just maybe 15, 20 people. And then I came back to school. I learned that there is actually a Model UN program at my school, so I got involved, and a lot of my friends started joining it, and I think that every student who does Model UN is ambitious and a good public speaker. It's a good crowd to be with, and I know I've met so many people through the conferences I went to, so it's really a great program.
Now, had you heard of Model United Nations, Model UN, before you joined it? You mentioned you were at Oxford.
Yes.
And you found out there was one at your school, but had you heard very much about it?
A little bit. I know maybe 1 or 2 people in my class were doing it at that time. I think I missed the deadline or something, but I didn't get involved freshman year. But then afterwards, so I didn't hear about it through my teachers as much as I probably wanted to.
Right. Now, prior to getting in the Model UN program, did you know very much about the United Nations, and did you learn a lot in this program?
It's embarrassing, but I don't think I knew anything about the UN. Rather, I knew probably a brief history, but that's about it. I really wish they taught it in school more. Now, through Model UN, it's encouraged the students, especially me, I know, to read the newspaper and to really get involved, which is why I took this internship, because it was really so embarrassing that I didn't know anything before.
What are some of the basic things? I mean, obviously you learned a lot about the United Nations in this program, the General Assembly, the Security Council, drafting of resolutions, but what other skills did you pick up, let's say? What did you come out of it with that will help you in college, in the university level, and further along in life in your professional setting?
Well, before you actually go to the conference, you have to write a paper called a position paper, and that requires a huge deal of research, and I didn't really know how to research before I got involved, and that's definitely helped me in the rest of my high school career. So I had to research, I had to write, leaving important, putting important information in the paper and knowing what to keep out. And then there's definitely the public speaking part. You have to get up sometimes in front of 300 other high school students, which can be pretty daunting, and speak about your research and your position paper. And then there's also just, you need to learn how to negotiate and talk to people during something called an unmoderated caucus, where it's not a formal setting anymore. You go and you seek other people out who may want to draft a resolution with you. So all of those things are important, and definitely learned how to do this.
Well, it's certainly a very important program and a very interesting program too. I've talked to dozens and dozens of graduates from the Model UN program, and I have not found a one yet who did not enjoy it. It didn't matter if that person came from Indiana, Illinois, Tennessee, wherever it might be. They really enjoyed the program. Now, roughly, Lucia, how many Model UN programs? I know you have Model UN programs at the university level, at the high school level. Just roughly, how many programs are there at each level, and roughly how many students in the United States and overseas too, perhaps?
Well, first I would like to add that it's not just college and high school, but also middle school.
Oh, middle school
is
also,
the
right.
newly
Right.
growing sort of Model UN population. I would say worldwide, on a yearly basis, we have about at these three levels, about 500,000 young people participating in Model UN. Initially, I would say in the earlier years, it really took off in Europe, so that if you had asked me this question maybe 10 years ago, I would say most of the Model UN conferences were taking place in Europe. Today, I would say it's 50% here in the United States, 50%, if not more, and the rest in Europe. I would say also that initially it started, as you heard in the video, at Harvard University. So it stayed at the college level, but in the late 70s, early 80s, it started trickling down to the high school level. So that I would say that the high school level Model UN conferences are outnumbering the college level Model UN conferences, and there's a real growing and vibrant middle school Model UN conference sort of community that is forming.
Now, you at UNA USA, you do not have a large staff. You cannot staff all these thousands of Model UN conferences going on around the country and around the world. But if somebody's interested in finding out if there's a Model UN program in their school or whatever, can they go to the UNAUSA.org website to find out, or get in touch with you, and you could tell them if there's probably one in their area?
Absolutely. Our website, UNAUSA.org, there's a section that includes a Model UN calendar, and it holds more than 400 Model UN conferences worldwide, and anyone can go to it, and anyone can sort of choose a country or a month and see what is happening in the Model UN community during that time period.
That's a great resource. Well, my guests today are Dr. Lucia Rodriguez. Dr. Rodriguez is the Vice President of Education at the United Nations Association, the UNA USA. And my other guest is Elizabeth Scarinci, and she is a Model UNer, a graduate of 2 Model UN programs, and has been very involved in the Model UN programs in the past. And she's also doing an internship this summer at UNA USA in New York City. We've talked about the Model UN program. There's another one that is sort of a larger part of this, I guess. It's called the Global Classrooms. Lucia, what exactly is Global Classrooms?
Global Classrooms is Model United Nations, but when I started working on Model UN 8 years ago at UNA USA, I realized that it was a very Ivy League sort of activity. It was the Ivy League schools, universities, prep schools that were participating in it, and that the urban public school kids did not have as much of an opportunity to participate in it. It was just not something that was occurring either in the after-school hours or even in class. So Global Classrooms is Model UN for the urban public schools. It is also a curricular program because we decided that if we were going to bring it to these urban public schools, we needed to have curricular resources so that teachers could use it, especially teachers that didn't have a background in Model UN. So we have created three curriculums, one on sustainable development, the other on peacekeeping, the other one on human rights. We're working on our fourth that deals with trade, finance, and development, all, of course, learning about these topics through the vehicle of Model UN. We also decided that if we were going to support these teachers, we would need to provide professional development. So Global Classrooms also provides professional development to the teachers and the students that are involved. And then the culminating event, of course, the conference. So we work through Global Classrooms. We work with teachers beginning, let's say, in the United States in September. And then in the spring, we hold a conference for all of these kids in each of the cities that we're in to participate in this conference. The conferences can range from 300 students to the largest one that occurs here in New York City for New York public school students, where we have 2,500 kids coming together at the United Nations. And that is really, it's bringing this incredible experience to as many kids as possible. And that is what Global Classrooms is.
And that's very important. And we've got a very interesting video, another videotape that you brought that will give us a bit of an overview of the Global Classrooms concepts. We'll go to the tape.
Chicago Public Schools. Teachers, students, and parents working together, dedicated to excellence in educational achievement. This is the Chicago Educator, focusing on our public school community.
We can get Africa, Eastern European, and Western Europe to work together all as one, including the right to education, but also violence and integration of states. If we can get it on the one, we can do it on the other one as well.
The United Nations Associations of the United States of America, a foreign policy organization, has existed over 50 years. The organization's primary focus is to educate citizens about global issues in the UN through programs such as Global Classrooms Model UN.
Global Classrooms is something that the UN Association started. We began really with the arrival of Lucille Rodriguez, who was head of our education department, where we actually prepared curriculum, and we're going into 6 cities in the United States with the purpose of testing how in the public school system Global Classrooms can prepare children, young people, to do Model UN. And our belief in that is that it's the one experience that young people can have where they can role play in being somebody else, behaving as if they were from some other country. And it's something that we've found engages young people in a self-education, learning how to debate, learning how to negotiate. It's a unique experience for young people, and people who do it are hooked.
Model UN is typically an activity where kids from elite private schools, suburban schools participate in. You go to the Yales, the Harvards, the Princetons of the world, and those kids there know what Model UN is. Look at these kids that are coming from this Model UN community. They have certain skills. They know how to research, they know how to read, they know how to write, they know how to do public speaking, conflict resolution, problem solving, negotiation. They have all these skills. And so when I was hired for my position, I didn't come from a background of Model UN. I didn't even know what Model UN was.
You see, that was a very interesting short clip of a very interesting program. Let me ask you, you don't operate these programs, and you have to have partners. Who are some of your major partners in helping to either fund the Model UN/Global Classrooms program, or partners, perhaps schools, administrators, whatever it might be? Who helps you on this?
There's a range of partners. One, I guess, clarification I do want to make is in terms of Model UN and UNA USA, we do not own Model UN. There's all kinds of other organizations and young people that run some of these 400 Model UN conferences that I mentioned earlier. When it comes to Global Classrooms, however, that is our program. We do run, actually we are now in 21 cities in the US and abroad, and we run all the whole program and all the conferences associated with each of those cities. We have partners that range from district officials, education district officials. For example, in New York City, we work closely with the Department of Education. In LA, we work closely with the Los Angeles Unified School District. In Houston, the same thing. I would say also that teachers are our partners, because sometimes the way we get into a school, for example, we may start from the bottom. A teacher may hear from us or about us. She's interested in the program. She gives us a call, and then we reach out to her. We have parents as well who hear about this Model UN experience that their neighbor's child has had and wonders why it's not in their school, in their child's school. So they call out to us. And then importantly, we also have funders who are our partners, because Global Classrooms is offered at no cost to any of the cities that we are working in. So if you're in New York, for example, and you're a New York public school teacher and you want this program, I must thank our main funder, who is Merrill Lynch. They are the global sponsor of the program. Without their contributions or generosity, we would not be able to bring these programs to all these 21 cities where we do have the program. We have other funders such as Deutsche Bank and National Geographic and Microsoft and a Better World Fund. I can go on, but it's really the community that I see as the different partners, and community. It could include other sort of non-traditional partners like the State Department in Washington, D.C. Our partner there is the State Department. And why? Because they provide the venue. The conference, our Global Classrooms Conference, is held at the State Department at no cost. And it's because of their interest in what we're doing and their interest in really trying to make a difference in the lives of these young people. They offer us, the State Department, for a day, free to all these young people from the DC public school system.
And as you mentioned, we couldn't go through all the funders and all the partners, but it's interesting, you look around the country. I know in Kentucky, the Kentucky YMCA operates one of the largest Model UN programs in the country with over 3,000 students. Rotary clubs have been involved in sponsoring them. So you have a wide range of sponsors who can be involved in this. And again, if people are interested in the Model UN program or the Global Classroom program, they can go to www.unausa.org and get much more information on this and many other topics too. Elizabeth, you made a very important point a minute ago about not knowing much about the Model UN, but even more importantly about not knowing much about the United Nations. And this has been a challenge in helping the American public better understand the United Nations. I think most international observers, UN watchers, international relations specialists will probably agree that the American media do not do a very good job in covering the United Nations. That's an understatement, to be quite honest. But anyway, how do you learn more about the UN now? Now, you're in a setting where you're working with UNA USA, but where do you go to get information? Do you go to the web? Obviously the newspapers to some degree do cover a small part of what the UN is doing, but where do you get your information?
Well, through Model UN, before you go to the conference, you have to read a background guide. So that'll discuss your topics before you go in and actually debate and write your papers and start the conference. So that gives a general overview of a few topics that you're going to go more in depth. But then outside of the UN, or outside of Model UN, the newspaper doesn't, like you said, it doesn't give enough credit to the UN. It mainly, if it focuses on the UN at all, it focuses on the bad things, the negative relationship with the US the UN has. But outside of that, the web is important. The UNA USA website, unausa.com, or .org rather, has an extensive list of background guides that have been used for Model UN conferences that give you details about different problems throughout the world. Also, just the UN, various UN websites such as UNESCO.org has, for example, a a map of the World Heritage sites. So you can get information about the World Heritage Committee, UNESCO, all of these different organizations working within the UN through the internet, because the newspapers unfortunately don't cover it as well as they should. So.
That's very true, and there's always something important happening at the United Nations. You could have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 articles every day on something. Now, closely linked to this, the lack of information the American media provide about the United Nations, but also in the area of textbooks, and we're just about out of time, but if you could, Lucia, tell us about a study that you did not long ago showing how little information we get in college textbooks.
Right. Actually, we did a study about 3 years ago that looked at the treatment of the UN in social studies textbooks at the high school level, because we feel that we should really start learning about the UN earlier than college. And what we found was, no surprise, that very, very little information on the UN exists in these social studies textbooks, because we feel that, it's great that Elizabeth can go to the website and she can, she reads newspapers and she herself, because she's self-motivated, becomes informed about the UN. But wouldn't it be better if it's a required course and it's in the textbooks that all students are using in their day-to-day classes? And so, as I mentioned before, it was dismal, very, very, very little. And another problem is that it's seen as something that is outdated, that is not relevant anymore, that is not important. And oftentimes also in a lot of the public school systems, it's not tested information. So if it's not tested information, it's not going to be included in these social studies textbooks that many of these young people are using. So it doesn't look like a pretty picture, but we're working on making sure that, at least through the courses that are being offered, and not just in the after-school hours, because Global Classrooms is not just for after-school hours. We try to integrate the teaching, the learning of the UN within already existing courses during the normal school hours.
Well, Lucia Rodriguez, Elizabeth Scarinci, thank you very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you for having
Good
us.
to be here.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us on today's Global Connections program.